Hello, world. I am Kathryn Walker. I go by Katie. I am the creator of a company called Revitalist that I'm now the CEO of. And what I have learned since opening Revitalist in 2018 is a lot. So what I want to do today is I want to talk about a neurologic theory that I have that talks about I feel like we should look at mental health. I think we're looking at mental health completely wrong. I think we've done so for decades, and I think people are dying because of it. So since I've been involved in about 12,000 infusions since about 2018, and I've been a nurse for 20 years, I've got anesthesia background, and then I've been a psychiatric nurse practitioner for a couple of years now. I've seen kind of different pieces, and I've got some assessment skills from working in the ICU for about 10 years that have really allowed me to see somewhat of neurologic patterns that I believe that we're seeing with ketamine and then also psychedelics. So today I'm going to talk about this neurologic theory that I've created, and I like to utilize it in my consults. So should you want to use this as an information piece, please do. We're all learning about the brain, right? And we're seeing that maybe it's not all genetics, maybe it's not all chemical imbalances. Do all your neurotransmitters and such and all the different chemicals in our brain, do they have some type of, changing or any type of effort to influence our daily situations in our brain? Sure, they do. But what I'm seeing is it's a dysfunction of the networks that we have in our brain. So that's kind of what I want to talk about today. So this word right here, it's a big word, ketamine. And ketamine, what we're seeing, so it's been around since 1970. It's FDA approved, a dissociative anesthetic. It is utilized in many capacities, right? You'll hear it utilized in veterinary medicine, more so for its safety index. But then also what we're really seeing with ketamine is the amazing piece is it is the first acute intervention for acute mental health needs. So let's think about this, okay? People who are struggling with their mental health, typically you're not struggling just with one thing. You may have a primary diagnosis, but with that primary diagnosis, just so everyone knows, anyone can be misdiagnosed up to 78% of the time in the mental health world. What does that mean? That means that we're almost worse than placebo. So we would do better, probably not diagnosing anyone with anything and just treating the symptoms. So what I've seen with individuals who come to the clinics is if they come to the clinics with depression, anxiety, PTSD, whatever diagnosis they feel, OCD, what we're seeing is this is a piece of the puzzle. And if we're focused just on that one primary aspect, we're making our brain very unilateral. And our brain is extremely complex, but it's not eclectic, right? Each of our brains, from what I see, are following neurologic patterns based on the way that we evolve over time. So everyone believes in muscle memory, right? Muscle memory is a universally known topic. And let me tell you today, your muscles don't have memory. They're fibers. They contract and they relax. That's all they do. It's all your muscles do. Your muscle memory person is your brain. So the physicality of the muscle memories is your brain. Our brain also remembers behaviors. So if you go back and you think about all these situations that you've been in life, right? With these pieces, with the behavioral aspects, our brain picks up on things along the way. To whatever saved us at that time, whatever our subconscious did, whatever emotion we had at that time, we emotionally reacted to a situation to save us. Our brain holds on to some of those pieces. Sometimes your brain's going to hold on to the worst of the worst. Sometimes it's going to hold on to the fact that there was a sunset or there was a Bluetooth brush. But our brain holds on to different things for different reasons, which is why talk therapy can be so ineffective, because we're trying to force ourselves to see what our brain saw. And that's our subconscious, right? So it makes no sense. So what I see when people come to us, if they say, oh, I've got depression, I've got complex PTSD, I have anxiety, I can't sleep. What I've seen is, and if anyone wants to draw these or make these actually look more professional than my drawings, please do. But anyone who knows me knows that I draw a lot of things out. That's just the way my brain works. So what we see is here's your brain, right? And typically you'll see these 5 coexisting symptoms at one time, and you're feeling these symptoms at different levels up. So you will have depression, anxiety, insomnia, suicidality, and then trauma symptoms, right? So we can call these whatever we want, right? Everybody gets all in a tizzy or what we want to call them. But the suicidality piece, just so everyone knows, 70% of people have suicidal thoughts at one time in their life. So you're not sick if you're having suicidal thoughts unless you act on it, right? That's the piece. That's the fear indicator. So you have these suicidal thoughts, and it establishes fear. Fear will then, create some dopamine levels and stuff like that. Then people will have chronic suicidality. They just don't know how to break. So typically the individuals that I see who come in for ketamine infusions, they'll have all 5 of these coexisting symptoms. So therefore I made a proprietary scale that actually makes all these coexist so we can see risk mitigation, right? So we got to see who's at risk, not who's treatment resistant. So everybody feels like we're really, really cool by saying you're treatment resistant if you failed too. How many people are we losing along the way to become treatment resistant? Do we want our kids? So if anyone knows, like the kids between the ages of 10 to 14, the second leading cause of death is suicide. So are we going to give our children chronic medications that are changing the entire neurologic landscape of their brain? Are we going to give them those medications when they're acutely suicidal and we expect them to work in 6 weeks? It makes no sense what we're doing. Zero. The thing about ketamine has data that shows 1 infusion can break suicidality 98% of the time. It's acute intervention for an acute situation. And what needs to happen is we use ketamine infusions as a first line defense for people who are at high risk. If you are not sleeping and you are having thought and you have depression and anxiety and trauma and you're having suicidal thoughts, your risk is extremely high. Okay? Because when we don't sleep, we don't process. We don't process anything. So we wake up and our plate just keeps getting heavier and heavier and heavier. And I know that you all feel that, who are struggling with mental health issues. There's nothing wrong with your brain. It's on the wrong path. So that's where ketamine comes into play. That's where a lot of these psychedelics will eventually come into play. They disconnect. They give the brain a chance to breathe for a second. And when they have that disconnect piece to give the brain the chance to breathe, I'll tell people all the time, when you have somebody who says, you're not a depressed person, you're a person living with depression. And you're like, well, I don't know what that means, right? Ketamine allows you to feel like a person living with depression. You get a third line perspective on the symptoms that you're living, that you're feeling every day, that you feel are part of you. They are not part of you. You feel that way, but you can actually disconnect your person from your symptoms of your brain to where you don't have to feel like you're living in the darkness all the time with all these pieces. So what we see with ketamine is ketamine actually starts disconnecting a lot of these pieces to where if we could just step back for a second, we're like, oh my gosh, it's almost like I've been in a psychological abusive relationship with my brain. And you're able to step back and you're able to see it. Once you can see it, that's when your brain retraining starts happening. So the beautiful thing about ketamine is ketamine not only works anatomically with the brain, right? It strengthens the structures of the brain, but physiologically, it also helps to strengthen the networks of the brain. And then psychologically, it's disconnecting this piece from the brain to where we can step back from ourselves and we can say, oh my gosh, I had no idea how I was, like you're able to see it, right? You're able to see when you cycle. You can see what causes you to cycle. So a lot of people be like, oh, I know when I go visit my in-laws, my depression gets worse. Well, ketamine makes it so granular with like tangible aspects to where it may be, it's the way your mother-in-law looks at you, right? That causes that cycling. But in life to where we don't have ketamine psychedelics, we're just guessing what causes it. But under ketamine, you're awake, but you have a special sense of clarity. You also have a special, or you also feel foggy, right? So that's kind of the cool thing to where I can say, why do you feel bad? And off ketamine, you'll say, I don't know, I just feel bad. But on ketamine, you will say, well, I feel bad because of this, this, and this, right? So I'll tell people a lot of times, you may feel, this is my snow globe analogy. So you may feel like you're in the middle of a snow globe and I shook you up and that storm's kind of going all around you. You can't tell where it stops, where it stops. It just feels heavy. and pressure, and you're not sure just where, what to do, right? Because you just feel lost almost. So what ketamine does is it makes it like a sliced MRI, right? You know what that is? There's like 3,000 to 5,000 images. So ketamine goes in and it allows us to start taking these specific chapters out of the brain to where we can actually identify a lot of this stuff that's causing your subconscious to react. So what ketamine does, it lowers your consciousness and it increases your subconsciousness. Okay. So with ketamine specifically, our consciousness, we think, is in control, and it is not. And people are struggling with your mental health, you know that it's not, right? Because you feel emotionally led all the time. You do not feel objectively led. So our conscious is more objectively led. It's weaker, it's analytical, and it likes check boxes, right? Well, that's not what happens when we're in a situation that may cause us to react, right? You can't be analytical in a situation that catches you off guard. That's your subconscious that comes up. So our subconscious is simple and strong and stupid, right? Stupid, simple, strong. The 3 S's of the subconscious. But what happens is it reacts and it saves us. Period. End discussion. It saves us. But also our brain remembers that. It makes an acute impression on the brain. So with ketamine, when our conscious lowers and our subconscious increases, then we're able to analytically, third person, look at our subconscious. And I'll tell people all the time, you got to treat your brain almost like a narcissist, right? Our brain wants to keep us alive. It wants to, it's surviving, right? That's all it wants us to do is survive. Our brain does not care how we feel. It does not know right from wrong. It does not know good from bad. It's the way that we train it. So if you're on your same level of your brain, right? Like they always will tell you, like if you're dealing with a narcissist, you never get on the same level because you're going to lose every time. So if it's you and your brain, employee to employee, you can't see what your brain's doing. So you got to go to an administrative level. So ketamine allows us to step back. Instead of being in the fight, we're actually stepping back from the fight and we're analyzing the fight. So you can be that administrator looking at your brain. Once you see what your brain's doing and you understand what your brain's doing, then you start getting the power to where you can increase the strength of your networks. So what networks are these? There's a network, which a lot of people don't even talk about right now. Hopefully we will begin all this stuff soon. But there's a network called your salience network. And there's also a network called your central executive network. And then there's also another one called your default mode network. And what we're seeing is all of these lovely networks are really what is causing our reactions, our strengths, our vulnerabilities, all these different pieces, right? So rumination, what's rumination? Rumination is when your thoughts come up and they loop and they loop and they loop. And you have people who say, just drop it, just drop it. Literally, you can't drop it because you don't have the skill set in your mind to drop it. So I'll tell people, every time you break rumination, it's like lifting a 5-pound weight. And ruminations are just abstract, right? They're just thoughts. But if you can learn to break them to make them more objective thoughts, then you're able to actually strengthen your brain. Ketamine allows all of these networks to get stronger. They get disconnected. When you get disconnected, you're able to see how all of these are actually integrating more effectively. So what we're seeing is it's not your chemical imbalance. A lot of times it's the way the information gets interpreted into our brain and how we process it. So it's the processing from the software, right? So it's one thing with the kids. I'll talk to, adolescents a lot, but with the kids, when they have the processing come in, so think about it. We blame screen time. We blame all these different pieces. Oh, they just need nature and all this other stuff, right? That's fine. But we're training these kids' brains to function at such high processing speeds They don't have the hardware to do it. So these kids, when you talk to a kid, your kid's going to be at high risk if your kid's not sleeping at night. Your kid's at a high risk to kill themselves, period, in discussion. And they want their brain to slow down. So all the kids that we've dealt with, they just want their brain to slow down. So if your kid is not able to sleep and they can't turn their brain off, you need to get your child some help. Period. They just need help because they don't know how to do it. And it's a weakness in the vulnerability. So I'll tell them, here's your software, right? Or here's their software and here's their hardware. So what ketamine does is ketamine allows that disconnection from their overarching speed of software that they have no idea what to do with. And then each time your hardware gets a little bit stronger to where eventually the goal is that their hardware matches their software so they can actually integrate together. So the brain's all about integration. So I always tell people, think about Newton's laws of physics. That's the basis of this theory, is Newton's laws of physics. To every action, there's equal and opposite reaction. So when our brain hits conflict, which it does a lot of times, right? Everyone's brain hits conflict. It's how do we process it correctly? And you know what? We never talked about processing in mental health. Imagine that, right? So when you hit this conflict, let's think about Newton's laws of physics. Every reaction has equal and opposite reaction. You hit conflict, you go to polarities. Everybody loves the diagnosis of bipolar, right? So my personal opinion, and this is my big chart, my big theory is you hit conflict. What is conflict? Conflict is a significant event. It can be changes. So I see kids when they go from middle school to high school to college to professional to marriage, where maybe they have a psychological abusive relationship, or marriage to divorce, having a kid. It's something that changes your baseline structure of who you think you are. I mean, COVID hit conflict for every athlete out there. And look at our athletes right now. They're killing themselves and others all the time, right? Because they lost their base, and a lot of them are not transitioning. They don't know how to. So when we hit conflict, our brain goes to polarities. So think about anxiety and depression. They're completely opposite from each other. Why do they live in the same space? I don't know. Unless it's Newton's laws of physics saying why anxiety and depression live in the same space. So what I mentioned earlier with like muscle memory, behavioral memory, all these different pieces, right? Think about muscle memory. Our brain duplicates what it knows. It becomes easier as we train, doing different aspects. It becomes a habit. We'll put the same context with behavioral. It becomes a habit behaviorally, right? So the brain duplicates what it knows. And our brain, like I mentioned earlier, doesn't know right from wrong, good from bad. It's how we train it. So once our brain's on this trail, it's going to walk this trail because our brain's stubborn. And it thinks it is saving us, right? But we get ketamine on board, psychedelics, we step back, we go to the trailhead, we can reposition our brain and start training down the other way with a focus on the salience network, the central executive network, in your default mode. We all have these guys. Some are great, some are bad, some are misprocessing, some are processing too much, right? So this is how we regulate. So this piece right here, let's put the brain as a similarity to the other organs in our body. You hit conflict. Your conflict goes to polarities, anxiety and depression. Unless you can figure out the resolution of that conflict that happened. So typically what I see is people will hit conflict, and then within 6 months, they'll start having symptoms of anxiety and depression if they didn't effectively process the change. So they'll have symptoms of anxiety and depression. Over time, if you do not address your conflict effectively, which we don't know, right? Like consciously, we don't know. We're going to go talk therapy. We're going to try to force out what our brain we think is doing. And our brain's Oz. That's the piece of it. We don't know what our brain's doing. It's way smarter than our consciousness. But when ketamine comes up, ketamine will show our brain, all right, brain, show us what you're doing. And it will show all the different aspects where like, oh my gosh, yes, that's it. No wonder, right? That's where ketamine comes in. It's so awesome. But so here's your mild, right? So this is my thought process for neurologic failure from mental health. But here's your chart, X and Y axis, you get conflict, you got anxiety, depression. Should you not address the baseline conflict here, then it's going to duplicate over time. Then eventually you're going to get a diagnosis of bipolar 2, bipolar 1. In between here, you're going to have some schizoaffective. Then you get schizophrenia. And then my personal opinion is you're in severe failure once you're at paranoid schizo, right? But what ketamine does, what we've seen it do, it can unstack this failure. There's hope. If you have schizophrenia, there's hope for you. If you're bipolar 1 with mania, there's hope for you. Think about bipolar. It's a more reactive angle of anxiety and depression. Okay. Think about schizophrenia. Schizophrenia, when I told you that when we hit conflict, we go to polarities, right? So what is schizophrenia? They have no concrete base. They're all abstract. They're all abstract. Okay. They're living in their own world because it's safer there. But that's the abstract piece. What's the opposite of abstract? Concrete, right? So here, when you hit conflict, your brain's going to go to the polarities. Abstract. These are your schizophrenics. These are people who live, who disassociate, right? So that's an abstract piece. Go to your concrete world. Your concrete world is your OCD. You try to over control everything, right? It's all concentric. This is a big one right here. Control versus out of control. Think about that one. When you feel out of control, what's your brain going to do? It's going to match the polarities. When it matches the polarities of feeling out of control, it goes to over control. What's the ultimate ineffective coping mechanism for over control? Suicide. So when someone feels completely out of control, their brain's going to match the polarity to say, you should kill yourself and you'll get back in control. The first thing that we need to do is when we have suicidal thoughts is to step back and say, why did I just have that thought? Do I feel out of control? And if I do, why? What am I looking at? Right? What do we do right now? Call 911, call 988, go to the ER. Let's give you some Valium and Haldol, right? Let's electrocute your brain with ECT. Mental health is going to go down as one of the worst and the most ineffective specialties in the world until we found ketamine and psychedelics. So when you feel out of control, the overarching piece is that you're going to kill yourself. And if you've ever been around someone right before they kill themselves, they're very calm. They're abnormally calm because they feel completely in control of their situation. That's the abnormalness piece of this. Okay. So there's other pieces, right? When you hit polarities. So the other piece, if you think about like PTSD, PTS, whatever you want to call it, right? Trust versus paranoia, right? Those are opposites. And then also think about your servitudes, right? All your first responders that are killing themselves right now, all your physicians and your nurses and your therapists that are trying to help right now, they have an extremely high suicide rate. They're community servants, okay? So they came out with the love aspect to help. They get so fearful, they start getting paralyzed in their own fear. And that's when they start struggling sometimes. And you'll see it. They decompensate, they start decompensating, right? So these are polarities. But what we want to do is we want to resolve the conflict. How do you resolve the conflict? You integrate it. You get these two to come together to find neutrality. Here's your neutrality piece. So what does that mean? Right? Another draw. Here's where we want to be, is in the present. What does ketamine and psychedelics allow us to do? It forces us to be in the present. Most people have no idea how to sit in the present. When you are sitting in the present, picture one of the, the ninjas who are sitting there, eyes closed. You think they're asleep, but they're in this deep meditative state. You throw a baseball at them and they catch it. It's because they're in the present. They're able to react to anything that they want to react to because they're fully in the present moment. Most of us are not trained to be in the present. That's what meditation does. That's what yoga helps with, is to learn to live in the present. Most people are struggling so much, they have no idea how to do that. So that's the beautiful thing about ketamine and psychedelics. You don't have to know how to do it. It's a medical intervention that allows you to be in the present, where you're neutral. Neutrality, right? We're trying to be in the middle of all this stuff. So what happens though, for the most part, so think about trauma, right? These emotional triggers that we've held on to. We'll take our past and we put it on our present. That's why we get triggers in the present, because we've not resolved the past stuff, right? We have no idea what to do about it. Or we take our past situations, we completely miss the present, and we prepare for the future because we do not want what happened to us in the past to happen in the future, and we completely forget who we are in the present, right? So the goal with all of this is that we learn these skill sets, we increase our network structure, so we learn to live in the present. So this is the other piece that I've seen, is divide your brain into 3 areas, okay? You got your frontal lobe, which is above your eyes. You got kind of your middle, which is a part called the amygdala. And then you've got your back, which is your occipital, right? So your frontal lobe, that's where your personality is. So frontal lobe, personality. Short-term memory is in your frontal lobe. Okay. With your short-term memory, there's emotions connected to it. So put all those together. Anyone who's living with trauma, let's think about these. Frontal lobe, short-term, emotions, looping. What is that? PTSD, PTS, trauma. Our brain's not had time to actually process it. So if we get hit by a significant situation, it takes about 6 months for our brain to go through all 7 stages of trying to process all that stuff. If we get hit within 6 months of something else significant, our brain stops processing. It starts getting stuck up here in the frontal lobe. And I know veterans that are out there and anyone who's experienced trauma, right? You all know what that feels like. So it gets stuck. And you can't do anything about it. And every time it comes up, you feel this overwhelming emotion connected to it. So what ketamine does is it allows that memory that's connected to the emotion to be disconnected. That's the dissociative aspects, okay? So when it disassociates, the amygdala is able to start processing it. So it's disconnected. You're able to see it, but you're able to see it from the third person view, like, oh, it happened on TV, right? And your brain will start processing it very, very quick. Our brain processes things at amazing speeds. So once this happens and it disconnects the emotional from the physical, or the subjective from the objective, once it disconnects that, the amygdala takes it and starts processing it, and it puts it into your long-term memory. So in the long-term memory, that is where our memories are stored, but they're not connected to emotions. That's where we get our power back, people. So if you are living if you are emotionally led and you're not objectively led, you've not processed something correctly. And that's okay. You don't need to get put on medications long-term that say that you're chemically imbalanced. More so, we need to have that emotional intelligence to try to understand the objective and the subjective, the physical and the emotional aspects of each situation. And so our brain can process it. So if you talk about death, right, the way you know this stuff, I mean, you can see it. So let's talk about, like, my brother got killed when I was 14, he was 17, he had a motocross accident, right? Died within 24 hours, all head trauma. So I can talk about it. Can I bring emotions with it? Can I talk about how he donated his organs and all these different pieces and all the horrible trauma that happened to me when I was in my 2nd week in high school? Sure, I can talk about that stuff, but I can bring the emotions with it if I need to. Versus like my mother, who recently passed, more so probably of complex trauma that she never effectively dealt with that turned into Parkinson's. My mother never could bring his name up, right? He died in 1998. Mom just died in 2022. That's a significant time. So she was never able to process that. She was never able to bring up the good memories. It was all the fear tactics of how horrible that situation was, right? So when you talk to people, and if they're emotionally led, I say, you need to let's look at your mental health. And it's not a bad thing, right? Once you get in the system, people are like, I don't want to get in the system. You're right. You do not want to get in the normal system we have right now, because we're going to put you on 45 different medications. We're going to recommend electrical therapy to your brain, and then, or go 911. We're really good at using restraints, right? 4 or 5 point restraints. We are inhumane to how we treat people in mental health right now. But ketamine and psychedelics will allow us to change all that. Okay. So there's hope out there. The recommendations for ketamine, it's usually 6 treatments over the course of 2 to 3 weeks. Each time you're going to see changes. It's amazing. You're going to start feeling like yourself again. Are you going to have triggers? Absolutely. You can still have triggers. But that's when you get another infusion. That's when you have a coach or a therapist. So therapists help you to process, right? Coaches help you to say, okay, let's look at it this way and let's figure out what we want to do this way. And then guides are, all right, I'm going to be here with you if you need safety. So it's very, very complex, but it's very, very tangible. Ketamine is giving us these tangible aspects to where we can actually look at mental health and we can say, it's going to be okay, guys. So ketamine's been around, like I said earlier, since 1970. We use it in C-sections. When moms, we don't use it as first line, but we use it as like a third line agent with C-sections. We use it for our pediatric population with blood draws. We use it in veterinary medicine because it allows our little animals to keep breathing, and it allows their blood pressure and such to be more controlled. So the veterinarian can focus on the animal instead of focus on having to breathe for the animal, right? So that's why we use it in veterinary medicine. It's on the World Health Organization's list of essential medications. So every country in the world has access to ketamine. We have this solution at our fingertips. I'm asking you to step back, and I'm asking you to be an advocate for this because you deserve it. And so does our children. So do our parents. So does everyone else. We all deserve the ability to learn to walk through life and actually have a functional brain. Not one that's overly medicated that we don't know what to do with it. So if you're struggling with anxiety, trauma, depression, insomnia, suicidality, pain conditions, okay, even pain conditions, a lot of these, they come from our brain, right? The neuropathic pain aspects. So if you want to talk about interstitial cystitis, fibromyalgia, neuropathies, CRPS1, CRPS2, RSD, phantom limb pain, all these things are coming from our brain that has misinterpreted data, and it's sending out pain signals, too many pain signals. Addiction, right? It's treating addiction. Why is it treating addiction? If you want to read about the default mode network, that will show you how it's treating addiction. Addiction's an ineffective coping mechanism that the brain's learned. And it destroys. You know this. We all know this. It destroys people and it destroys their families. So I'm doing this video because I want to share, right? You can disagree with everything that I've said, but if you have a kid who's out there struggling, ask your kid. First thing you should ask your kid, are you sleeping at night? Can you turn your brain off? And if your kid says no and no, try to find your kid some help. And that's something that we want to do, is we really want to offer this to the adolescent population. Youngest we've had is 12. The oldest we've had is 90. It's an acute intervention for an acute situation. There is no need to put your child on chronic medications when they're learning how to deal with their brain, because we as a society are overproducing the material going into their brains that are allowing them to excel at processing speeds that their hardware is just not ready for. So I'm asking us all to step back, open our eyes, realize there's so much more out there than what we know, and reach out to your insurance companies and tell them that you have the right for this treatment. Share this video with them if you want, but you want this treatment covered, right? It expands access. And not only that, every provider has the ability to give ketamine. We've just got to train everybody, right? So psychiatrists and therapists, there's not enough. We're all dying right now. But the neat thing with ketamine, nurses give it all the time. You got your anesthesia folks, you got your ER folks. Like, we've got all these people who are able to give ketamine, and it's such a low dose, we can train every specialty out there. So thank you for listening to this. If you've listened to the whole thing, share it if you want to share it. And, let's just push forward, guys. Now's the time to do it. Let's stand together and let's push forward. Let's make this financially responsible treatment that's about 80 to 90% less than what we currently offer. And the efficacy is almost double from some of the things that we're offering now. Sometimes it's more than double, right? It's amazing. We're offering the worst treatments out there possible at the highest cost. So let's stand together and let's push forward, because we deserve it, our kids deserve it, and our communities deserve it. So thank you for listening. Should you have any questions, comment, and I'll get back to them eventually.